Photoshop for iPad has just been released to the public and people have got a lot to say about it, and I've got a lot to say about it too as a graphic designer. This video is brought to you by Paperlike. Hi guys, I'm Will Patterson. I'm a hand lettering artist, logo designer, graphic designer, and I make these videos for you on this channel teaching you about design, creativity in general. Today I'm going to be giving you a designer's review of the well-awaited Photoshop for iPad. So as a designer, I've been using Photoshop for a long time, for over 15 years, not professionally for 15 years, but I've been using it as a kid. Photoshop was always one of those apps that I used to superimpose faces onto people or to take away eyebrows of people and just to experiment to see what you can do with people. When I became a designer, Photoshop was the first thing that I professionally learned, so I learned all online and basically became an absolute whiz at Photoshop. It was the most powerful photo editing tool at the time, and in fairness, it is still now the most powerful editing tool that you can use for photographs, and I still love it. It works amazing on all the products I own. Since the iPad has become more of a creation rather than a consuming tool for people like me and you, they've always wanted to have apps and elements of Photoshop in the iPad, but they have not been able to do it until now. Last year I attended Adobe Max where they excitedly announced Photoshop for iPad, and I don't just mean like Photoshop Mix or Photoshop Elements, I mean Photoshop for iPad. The stakes were high on this one. Everyone was really excited because we've always wanted to see what Photoshop would be like on the iPad, and due to some people thinking it's about taking the technology and just shoving it into the iPad because we see it on a Wacom Cintiq, it's not like that. So naturally I went and downloaded it. Now there's a 30-day free trial of Photoshop on the iPad if you want to try it out, and then if you have an Adobe Creative Cloud subscription, you get it. So when I first opened up Photoshop, it was very similar to what I'm normally greeted to in Photoshop on the computer. It was very Photoshop and Adobe-esque. It kind of looks just the same as Adobe Fresco because it's got that sort of family integration in there. Now before I get into the rest of this sort of designer's review of Adobe Photoshop on the iPad, I want to say that I came into Photoshop with the expressed idea of drawing. Now that was the wrong, as you'll see in a minute, the wrong way to look at this. Photoshop has been used by countless creatives to do a lot of drawing. Back in the day when we had like computer tablet monitors, we could draw on them. Now we just have iPads. Some people still do like the Wacom Cintiq, but I'm all about the iPad. So naturally I went into this process thinking, you know, I could just basically draw on Photoshop on the iPad and have all of the features like the cool layer systems and all the functionality and the effects that it's got inside of there. And how wrong was I? In fact, a lot of people online have been sort of stirring up controversy, and it has stirred up a lot of controversy in the creative industry because Photoshop has always been known for this jack of all trades sort of thing. You can do anything in Photoshop, such as flyer design, graphic design, drawing, illustration. It was for everything. So when people hear Photoshop, they may hear the fact that you can draw in it. Now, Photoshop is really intended for photography. It's got all the tools necessary to create amazing small incremental edits in a photo or huge photo manipulations for posters. So I went into Photoshop on the iPad thinking that I could draw, but in reality I couldn't, and that's because they basically have streamlined these apps. They recently brought out something called Adobe Fresco, which is a live drawing app with vector art, with bitmap art and live brushes. Adobe Fresco was designed for drawing. Adobe Photoshop on the iPad is not designed specifically for drawing. So I was kind of disappointed and deflated at the fact that it didn't have all the features inside of Adobe Photoshop on the iPad, because it didn't allow me to import my own brushes, import my own fonts, not that I could find it anyway, and there was a lot of lackluster abilities within Photoshop on the iPad. Some people may want to choose their own fonts. In fact, everyone probably does. And not only that, they may also want to change the character style. I couldn't find that within the iPad version of Photoshop either. And I couldn't even change the tracking of the typography, which was a bit of a bummer to me because sometimes people don't kern or track the typography correctly in the font. Another thing that I noticed right out the gate is how smooth it was when I was scrolling in and out, and how intuitive it was, just like Procreate when I could double tap or 3-finger tap to undo and redo. Now, one of the features that I do really like is the layer feature. There's two sort of layer features that you can look at inside of Photoshop on iPad. The ones at the top where you can look at the layers on the side of what you're working on, and then you've got an actual layers panel there as well, and that works super well just to see it in a normal Photoshop way. That's really what I think makes Photoshop there. Another cool feature that I did really like and works really well is the foreground and the background color picker. To change the foreground and the background, they have actually intuitively made it so you just have to like flick down on that and it will switch them around. Now this comes really handy for something called masking. So as I said, Photoshop on the iPad isn't really for like drawing yet. It hasn't got all the abilities in there for you to do that. But what it's really good at now, and its biggest strength in my eyes as a designer, is photo manipulation. Something that I saw was the fact that I could easily import pictures, and it's asking me to import pictures all the time in on the app, and then it was super easy to edit these pictures, such as using the healing brush, which gets rid of all of my spots. But not only that, it's got a clone stamp in there also. The biggest feature for me, and probably the best feature that I could have asked for complete editing control, was masking. Now masking, if you don't know, is basically putting a layer over an image or something, and when you use the brush tool in concordance with the black and white colors, it will add or take away that layer. So it basically rubs it out and then rubs it back in, or erases it out, erases it back in. I use this to create a darker background for myself in this portrait shot, and it worked pretty well. It was super easy. It was kind of like using a Wacom Cintiq with Photoshop. The great thing about Photoshop as well on the iPad is it's got full keyboard control. So if you want to plug your keyboard in or wirelessly retrieve your keyboard, such as from your Apple keyboard like I've done, then it gives you all these key commands that you can use. They feel very native, although they are slightly different to Photoshop, the real deal Photoshop, but they still work really well. And I can see how this is kind of like Procreate. People will use this because they are used to, like, you know, pressing buttons with one hand and then drawing with the other. And really what makes this Photoshop is the menu settings. Now obviously Adobe can't just bring down every sort of feature and menu setting and put it into an app straight away. That's quite hard. Although I do think there should be more features in there by now, seeing as how it was announced a year ago, and they still haven't got some of the basic features in there. Features such as free transform, the things that you take for granted, are there as well, and it works really well. You can crop, and everything is sort of basically centered around photography. You've got clipping masks, which look very similar to the ones that you find in normal Photoshop, but the problem is I don't think I'll ever be using that in concordance on photographs. I could be wrong, but I don't think I would. One thing that is the problem with Adobe on the iPad Pro is that Adobe are showing us there are going to be new features inside of the app, but, and it's a big but at the minute, they show us these features and say it's not currently supported. So for instance, on the layer properties, you've got effects and smart filters, which says it's not currently supported for this device, which makes me kind of sad. I don't know what's going on inside of Adobe, and I absolutely love Adobe for what they do, but these things should already be in here. That's my general thought, and I think it's everyone else's. The selection tool in Photoshop on the iPad works just the same way that you would think. It's all good. You've got a nice blending mode. You've got clipping masks for basic editing. Can I say this is really for designers now? Not really. I don't think it can be yet. But is it for photographers? 100%. If you use Lightroom on your iPad, you'll love Photoshop on your iPad. If you're like a YouTuber or someone who makes videos for a living or needs to make a thumbnail or something on social media, Photoshop gives you the ability to sort of get rid of the laptop stage and just do it on your iPad. So all in all, is Photoshop on the iPad like bad? Is it good? What do I think? Well, for me, Photoshop on the iPad is really not aimed towards people like me. It's aimed towards photographers. You can see it in their ads that they've put out online. Is this a bad thing? No, I think it's great because I've got Adobe Fresco if I did want to draw. When expectations don't get met, people get disappointed, but I think photographers are going to have a really high expectation for this and feel pretty good with what they've already got. Sure, there's some features in there that are not there yet. They're adding new features all the time. It's kind of like Adobe Fresco, where they haven't got all the features in there and they're adding them over time to see how it works across all the devices that they're adding it to. But for photographers, this is a definite win because it takes you out the laptop stage and it also keeps you in the Adobe ecosystem if you use Lightroom. For illustrators and artists and people like that, I wouldn't hold your breath with Photoshop just yet. It doesn't mean that it's going to be bad in the future. It just means right now you can't import brushes, and you don't really have much control over what you're drawing. If I was to give this a rating out of 10, I'd give it like a good 7 for photography. But for designers, it's below a 5, just because there's not really much there for designers just yet. But of course, this will change because it is Adobe. Adobe will be adding things in the future. So before everyone starts commenting down below, getting all really mad with Adobe, just think in the future it's going to be adding more updates, because you don't know what's going on behind the scene. They've got other things happening and other programs being made. They've even got Adobe Illustrator coming out on the iPad, which is going to be huge, and I can't wait for that. That's really for the designers. But just think about where Adobe is and what they're trying to do. I think it's a good time to be a designer because of all these new apps. It's becoming ever more close to just being able to design and have a design business straight from your iPad, and you don't need a computer. This video is brought to you by Paperlike. Now, I've been talking about iPads and everything on this video, and my channel is basically dedicated to iPads and creativity software. And basically, a lot of you ask me if I have a screen protector on my iPad when I'm recording, and the answer is yes, I do have a screen protector on. The screen protector is called Paperlike because it does what it says. It's paper-like. It feels like paper. It is a matte screen protector that gives you really good color resemblance. It doesn't really make a difference to the way you look at it. I would always go for a Paperlike screen protector because it makes my stylus, when it's going across the screen, feel like paper. It gives me that more traction on there. It stops the reasons for me using the iPad and gets me to use it because it just feels more natural. Not only that, if you have a matte screen protector, you get less glare, you've got less chance of reflections coming through and your hand sticking on the paper. If you'd like to get yourself a Paperlike for your iPad, click that link down below in the description and you'll basically get one and you'll thank me later. Guys, if you like this video, please remember to press that big fat red subscribe button. You could smash that subscribe button. If you did enjoy it and wanted to let me know what you think of Photoshop, put your comments in the comment section below. And if you really liked the video, press that like button. If you hated the video, press the dislike button twice, and I will catch you guys in the next video. See you soon. Goodbye.